I am Marco Davis, President and CEO of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute. Welcome to the second day of our 2021 Leadership Conference. We hope you enjoyed our first conference day yesterday. We had a great day of insightful, thought-provoking conversations on leadership, education, economic advancement, media narratives, and so much more. If you weren't able to join us or catch all the sessions you wanted to watch, we've got you covered. Links to the video recordings of our plenaries and breakouts will be posted here on the website for you to watch on demand. And be sure to check the agenda for any updates to the schedule. As you can imagine, in this virtual world, we occasionally need to shift things around. I want to thank all our speakers and panelists who participated in yesterday's sessions. I also want to thank our sponsors and partners, especially our conference host sponsor, Facebook, for their support for CHCI. We would not be able to do this without you. Today, we have a great lineup. In a few minutes, we'll start off with an important town hall session on environmental justice and communities of color, featuring 3 of our Hispanic Congress members. After the town hall, we'll have another cafecito networking break to give you a chance to engage with each other directly. Then we'll continue with sessions on identity, fintech, a topic on everyone's minds, infrastructure, and much more. When you're in the sessions, be sure to engage with each other via the chat feature and submit questions through the Q&A function. And we have a special added feature. We've posted a one-on-one conversation I had with Pedro Pizarro, the CEO of Edison International, here on the website. We had a great exchange of ideas, and that conversation is now available to watch anytime on demand. Also, at the end of the day, we'll share which outstanding teams were selected in our second annual pitch competition. Follow us, tag us, tell us what has inspired you or energized you at the conference on social media. Use the hashtag CHCIHHM21. Remember that your colleagues and friends can still register for free and participate by going to chci.org. Enjoy your day, and we'll see you back here soon.
Welcome to the CHCI Leadership Conference Plenary Session, Environmental Justice Town Hall. We are grateful to our sponsors, Natural Resources Defense Council, Walton Family Foundation, and the Environmental Defense Fund. Our panel chairs for today's session are Representative Nanette Diaz-Barragan, representing California's 44th Congressional District, and Representative Raul Grijalva, representing Arizona's 3rd Congressional District. They will be joined by our moderator, Mark Magaña. He is the founding president and CEO of Green Latinos, a national network of Latino environmental and conservation advocates. We will also hear welcome remarks from Heather McTeer-Toney, Vice President of Community Engagement for the Environmental Defense Fund. Please welcome our opening speakers, Representative Nanette Diaz-Barragan and Representative Raul Grijalva.
Welcome, everyone. We're fortunate to be here today at the CHCI Leadership Conference Environmental Justice Town Hall, where we are able to pull in the big names, the members of Congress and the committee chairs, to be able to intimately and deeply discuss the issues of our time with them. This segment will be the first of several conversations we will be having during this plenary. So get comfortable and let's get started. The United Nations has just issued a global warning that despite the current action plans submitted by 191 countries to curb greenhouse gas emissions, the planet is unfortunately on track to warm by more than 2.7 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. That's a global increase of almost 5 degrees Fahrenheit. To give you some perspective, the Earth's average temperature has risen by about 1 degree over the last 100 years. And you can see what is happening to the planet now. A global increase of nearly 5 degrees Fahrenheit means huge areas of our world becoming uninhabitable, millions of deaths and climate migrants, massive extinction of species, more frequent and destructive flooding, droughts, heat deaths, hurricanes, and wildfires. But wait. Fortunately, our conversations today are about what we can and must do about it now. Our guest today loves the pomp and the ceremony of the office. Nothing excites him more than a grand, flowery introduction. Let's get to it. From a community organizer in Tucson to the chair of the House Natural Resources Committee, let's all welcome our champion for those in need and a strong voice for the constituents of his home community. I give you Chairman Raul Grijalva. I scared you, didn't I? I bet you
Yeah,
thought
you
I was
did.
going to bring out the mariachis to serenade you again.
You know, thank you very much, Mark, and to you and organizations you work with, primarily Green Latinos. Thank you very much. The fact that we are having this discussion, the fact that the issue of environmental justice and the consequences of the climate crisis have on all communities across the globe and here in the United States, but in particular, the systemic, disproportionate ill effects that climate change is making even worse in environmental justice community, frontline communities across this country. That, unfortunately, happened to be primarily of color, happened to be primarily poor, and having to be primarily indigenous. And so when we look at that picture, and as we confront the points that Mark made so eloquently regarding having to deal with this crisis and not ignoring it anymore, we have to understand that as the policies going forward, the efforts that nations and our government must make to combat human-induced environmental change and crisis in this globe and in our country, we have to do that. We have no choices. These do nothing is consequential, and in the long term are going to hurt everything that we care about, whether it is the economies, community life, quality of life, and life itself. And so it's a survival agenda that we have to respond to with climate change. And in responding, let us not forget and leave communities behind, as we have systematically and historically done in this nation and, frankly, across the world. So it's not only a topic of relevance, it's a topic of how do we make sure that there's equity and in the solutions and in the efforts to combat climate change.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for framing this discussion that we're going to have. I really appreciate that. I mentioned at the beginning, at the top, the extreme existential threat that we're facing with the recent natural disasters happening globally and in the U.S., fires in California, tropical storms, droughts, hurricanes. Uh, these things are happening with more propensity, more strength, and it's undeniable we're living through and impacted by the global climate crisis now. This is not a future event. So, from your vantage point, how is this topic still up for debate in Congress? And what are
Well,
your constituents and the people you're talking to saying about how this is impacting them?
but the people I represent are keenly aware and support initiatives to combat climate change, and that's across the board, demographically and economically. But having said that, why the resistance to taking some bold and necessary steps going forward in order to deal with the reality that Mark pointed out with the UN analysis, and a study after study, blue ribbon panel after blue ribbon panel of scientists uh, come to the same conclusion. So that's not a debate point, and the consequences we're seeing around us is not a debate point that Mark pointed out. But what we're seeing right now is going from the topic of denial. I mean, that is not the point of opposition anymore. It's not the vital point of opposition. It is now about delay. It is now about uh, not responding to the urgency, but dragging the process of seeking remediation and solution, dragging that process out. That's what's going on now. And it's foisted upon us by the lobbying of industry, particularly the extraction industry. And you see it by by a variety of very powerful forces whose dependency economically is entirely on the vast consumption of fossil fuels, which is the main contributor to climate change and the crisis that we confront uh, in the globe. And that's where so it's become one about delay. It's become one about marginalizing it as a priority. And so that's the constant work. And when you come to the issue of EJ and environmental justice in frontline communities, that even becomes more of a risk, because if we're in the delaying the process of responding to climate change as a whole, then obviously the need for equity and and justice toward frontline communities gets even put lower in the discussion point. So that's what's in front of us. But I think that public will, public opinion, and and if we're truly committed to the issue of equity and dealing with systemic discrimination and racism as a root, uh, societal root in this country, then you have to confront environmental justice, and you have to confront uh, and deal with those communities. And I think that kind of public will and public support is behind us, and that's the big difference. So, the reconciliation package has some initiations. I wish it would have been more. I wish we would have gotten more. What the president is doing in terms of his working group and his task force is good. Putting emphasis of 40% of the money for infrastructure improvement must do adaptability and resilience for EJ communities as well. All those are part of what's being discussed right now. But the issue that concerns me the most is the effort to delay, and in delaying it, making the situation worse around climate change, but making it intolerable in frontline communities.
Yeah, it's so true. The obfuscation, the misinformation that they're trying to get around to cloud up the issue that is not a cloudy issue, it's clear as day, is huge. And you mentioned the Build Back Better agenda. I'd love to talk about the administration real quick. They recommitted us to the Paris Climate Agreement on the first day in office, signed multitude of executive orders prioritizing environmental protections and positioning the climate crisis at the center of policy. He also created the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, and now we're seeing making an initial investment. We had hoped it would be more to address the climate crisis in his Build Back Better agenda that you're
I
working
agree.
through now. So, how do you feel we're doing? How do are we really advancing the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws and addressing the climate crisis, or is it more lip service? And are we bringing the low income and communities of color to the table on this?
The Biden-Harris administration, from as far back as the campaign trail, they've taken the importance of process and participatory policymaking to heart. They've said that. When we first introduced the Environmental Justice for All Act, then Senator Harris was our Senate partner and leader there, and worked with us closely on the Senate companion bill. We were happy to see that the lessons that we learned through the development of the bill were being applied. And those lessons were when myself and Representative McEachin began dealing with the Environmental Justice for All Act, we made it a participatory process, a democratically participatory process, going to communities impacted by climate change and communities impacted with environmental justice issues and frontline communities. And from there, we got it. We got information, we had hearings, we had roundtables, and we had a summit in DC of over 300 or 400 environmental justice activists, leaders, and community people came. And from that, we did a draft, and from that, we came up with a bill. And I would hope that that's a good example for this administration, that there has to be intensive engagement to provide input into federal decisions. And that means everyone has to be engaged. And that's direct grassroots organizations, that is people on the ground. And creating these advisory councils are are important in shaping the implementation of policy at a federal level, but hearing directly from our communities about their story and what they see as going forward, I think is critical to anything that we do. And I'm hopeful that the practice that is ongoing right now in the administration continues. But we do have some benchmarks that are coming up. And those benchmarks having to do with the reconciliation bill, of which I agree with you. I don't think the investment in this area was as strong as it needed to be, or as robust as it should be. But I'm looking forward to what the advisory committee does in prioritizing environmental justice communities in federal policy and how infrastructure money should be directed. Those recommendations will be coming, and it could be a blueprint, should be a blueprint for the rest of us to support. I think that's progress. Now, it's the tangible implementation and the codifying of some things into law, and that's where we're at right now. And the Environmental Justice for All Act, regardless of other parts that are in other parts of reconciliation and other legislation, central to it are two things: cumulative effect and redress, and communities being able under the Civil Rights Act to take their discriminatory actions against them around environmental issues to court. And cumulative effect is that you just don't isolate one polluting industry, you isolate all those. You accumulate all the data from all the industries. Cancer Alley in Louisiana, you don't do it by studying one new polluting industry or the plastic company in isolation. It is a accumulation of effect that is affecting those communities, in their public health, their air quality, and their lives. And so I think those are key, and those need to be codified into law so any future administration can't change attitudes because there's a law that's going to mandate and give redress to communities to be able to fight.
Well, the process by which you created the Environmental Justice for All Act, the inclusion, the ability to hear the frontline communities, is a model that hopefully the Biden administration will continue to follow. And we do appreciate your work on that, and hopefully more of it will be implemented. And this is important, the work you're doing, the work CHC is doing as we continue this fight. So I want to thank Chairman Raul Grijalva for his time today, his hard work and tireless efforts on this and many issues for our community. So please stay tuned as we transition to our next speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thanks to CHCI for holding this section in the town hall. Very much appreciated.
That was a great conversation with Chairman Grijalva, and we appreciate that. And we're fortunate that our next guest has many similarities with our first guest. Both are proud children of immigrants. Both started off as community organizers. Both moved their way up the ladder as local elected officials. And both rose in prominence, fighting for environmental justice for their communities. Both are now members of Congress and chairs of their committees and subcommittees, respectively. And both are tenacious advocates for the Latino community and their constituents. We are excited to be joined this morning with none other than the chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Climate Change Task Force, our friend, Representative Nanette Barragan, representing the neighboring district to my hometown, California's 44th District. Welcome, Chair Barragan.
Thanks for having me, Mark. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thank you. As I mentioned earlier, Representative, it's been made crystal clear by no less of an authority than the UN and the Society of Global Climate Scientists that the climate crisis is upon us, and it is ravaging the earth and our people. Yesterday was the kickoff of Climate Week in New York, and President Biden, reacting to the hundreds of workers, many Latino dying of heat-related deaths, launched a strategy to combat extreme heat, including the development of new federal labor standards to protect workers. As the chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Climate Change Task Force, just in the last couple of months, you have supported the creation of the HHS Office of Climate Change and Health Equity and the initial implementation of President Biden's Justice 40 initiative. You've led efforts to secure robust funding for electric vehicles and called for bold environmental justice investments in the reconciliation bill. Your task force has also endorsed a dozen CHCI member-led environmental justice bills. Tell us more, if you will, as an insider, what role the CHC has been playing in fighting climate change and what part CHCA played in getting many of our environmental justice and climate priorities into the Build Back Better Act.
Well, thanks, Mark. First of all, the communication between the CHC and the White House has been very good. In particular, I've had meetings myself with the White House Council on Environmental Quality Chair Brenda Mallory. We have had EPA Administrator Michael Regan come into my district to talk to constituents about what their experience with environmental injustice issues. Even Vice President Kamala Harris spoke to me about environmental justice issues. So the communication is there. And as the chair of the CHC Climate Task Force, one of the things that I have been doing is having meetings with our members about priorities. And we put together a letter to the administration, and they were very responsive. We sent this letter in the spring on the CHC's priorities for the administration's implementation of its Justice 40 initiative. Now, the Justice 40 initiative is based on an executive order signed by President Biden to direct at least 40% of the benefits of climate and environmental spending to economically disadvantaged communities. So it's important that this initiative be implemented in a way that's meaningful and it directs investments in jobs to the Latino community. So the administration is working with us, also doing a briefing to CHC offices about the progress with Justice 40 initiative, and worked with my office to review their interim plan before it was released. So in regards to the role I have seen, they are working to also undo harmful regulations and weakening of EPA that we saw during the Trump administration. So, you know, it's still early. We have to make sure to continue the communication, make sure we continue to talk to them about our priorities, along with House leadership, to make sure that it gets implemented and to make sure that it gets into legislation that we are doing right now, you know, including reconciliation. So that communication is strong, and we've got to continue to keep up the fight for our communities to undo these injustices that we are seeing across the country.
Yeah, it is very important, and you've been playing such an important lead role in using our political power of our community to be able to influence our ability to get these important pieces into the legislation. One of the things you've always looked out for is the most vulnerable in our community. And so I want to hear further about how we're helping to create safeguards for the vulnerable in the Latino community. Specifically, we look at issues like the exacerbating effect that air pollution in the environment had on our COVID health and our mortality risk in our communities, and how that overall on the hardworking Latino families and communities in our America, including in your district.
Well, part of creating safeguards for the Latino community is strengthening the regulations around clean water rules, such as reducing the legal amount of lead that can be in drinking water, and the air pollution regulations, such as stronger fuel economy standards and setting public health based standards for air pollution. So we need to partner with administration and with EPA where we can and where necessary. We have to hold them accountable. You mentioned COVID. You know, COVID has unfortunately made the economic and environmental disparities faced by our communities far worse. We know that people with respiratory illnesses such as asthma are more vulnerable to hospitalization or even death from COVID. We also know that Latinos are disproportionately impacted by poor air quality. Just looking at my district in particular, we are one of the most polluted areas in the country when it comes to air quality. As a result, our asthma rates are twice the national average, and that makes our community more vulnerable to COVID. So this connection to the climate crisis and COVID is real, it's happening, and it's hitting communities of color first and worse. And we saw that directly with COVID. So in places like California, Arizona, and Texas, we've seen record heat waves and droughts because of warming climate. This has a public health impact on Latino communities, and it is a warning of what is to come if we don't work to transition off fossil fuels and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I think that's why it's so important that we work to pass President Biden's Build Back Better plan, which includes record investments, in clean energy and zero emissions technology to reduce emissions from our transportation sector and our electric grid. So we can't just repair existing infrastructure. We need these 21st century investments to reduce pollution and take on the climate crisis.
So true. And you as a leader have been taking on the oil and gas industry for your entire career. And as one of the very few leaders who can talk about taking on the industry and winning, what words can you leave us that might inspire our viewers to learn more, to do more, and to be proactive on the issue, knowing that despite the odds, we can come out victorious?
Well, thanks, Mark. First of all, it's going to take all of us. It's going to take all of us pushing in the same direction to meaningfully reverse the environmental injustice we see in the Latino community. We need to organize and we need to have our voices heard. And organization is just so very important. I've seen the differences in communities when you organize, and in some communities where people work in two jobs and it's harder to organize. So we have to be there for our brothers and sisters on these issues and reach out. These problems didn't arrive overnight, and we need to have a sense of urgency in Congress as well and in the administration to make meaningful progress. So that's where we need people to reach out to members of Congress, to write in, to write op-eds. Public sentiment moves the needle. And we need to hear from our nonprofit leaders, our advocates, and the business community that now is a time where we must do things different than before. So we have this unprecedented opportunity to make great strides in changing our communities for the better. And the core mission of CHCI is supporting leadership development for the next generation of Latinos. So we need our young people to inherit a habitable planet and sustainable communities that gives them the opportunity to build a more equitable and just society. So a key first step for climate and environmental justice investments is in the Build Back Better Act and holding polluting industries accountable in a way they've never been in environmental justice communities. So please get involved, especially our young people. We've seen the marches and the rallies, but we've also got to make sure to register and vote and to turn out. So just want to encourage our young people. Thanks, Mark.
Well, it's happening, but we need more of it. We can make the change that we want to see ourselves. And so thank you, Chair Barragan, for your time and your endless commitment to your constituents and all Latinos and all people. We are fortunate to have you as an advocate working tirelessly, and I mean tirelessly, for our better future. So thank you very much. Now, please join me as we welcome a message from Heather Toney, VP for Community Engagement at EDF.
Hello, my name is Heather McTier-Toney, and I serve as the Vice President of Community Engagement at the Environmental Defense Fund. Thank you for your leadership within the Latino community and beyond, truly serving as beacons of people-centered public service and policy. We have all benefited from your work. Environmental justice and community engagement have long been at the very core of your work, and thus Presente, Latinos Leading the Way, is more than just a theme. It's a living model of the contributions you've made, ideas you've fostered, and solutions you've shared that benefit us all. Today, the world needs your voice more than ever. As we face an ever-changing climate with impacts that more often hit Latino communities worse than the American majority, people-centered, science-based solutions are necessary to fight climate change. We must correlate and deeply understand the effects of past environmental injustice on social issues such as voting, immigration, healthcare, and housing in order to develop climate solutions that can be implemented around the world. We are here to listen to you and to learn from you. So please do not hold back on your thoughts, ideas, innovations, ingenuity, and spread them far beyond this event. The world needs Latinos to continue leading the way. And we at the Environmental Defense Fund stand ready to work alongside you. Thank you.
Buenos dias. First off, I want to thank CHCI for hosting this thoughtful leadership conference and focusing attention on environmental justice and how we can ensure the movement against climate change includes the opportunity for meaningful involvement for all Americans. I also want to thank again Chairs Grijalva and Barragan for their opening discussion and setting the tone for our conversation. Before we move to our panel, we want this to be an interactive discussion, and we invite you to be part of it by submitting your questions in the chat Q&A function, or by submitting your thoughts, reactions, and comments on social media using the CHCI conference hashtag CHCIHHM21. That's hashtag CHCIHHM21. So now let's get started. The global climate crisis is this generation's most pressing challenge, and one that continues to disproportionately impact minority and low-income communities. Latino and Black Americans are much more likely to face barriers around air and water quality, food insecurity, dangerous infrastructure, and more when compared to white Americans. And the time to address environmental justice is now. As I've mentioned previously, it's also a crucial week in DC for the President's Build Back Better agenda. The President has presented his Build Back Better agenda with significant initial investments to tackle the climate crisis and an opportunity to support significant investment in our Brown, Indigenous, and Black frontline communities through the Justice 40 initiative. We can influence whether or not our representatives move this agenda forward and start to make the changes we need. So let's talk about this with our panel of experts that we are fortunate to have us with today. First off, we have with us Dr. Cecilia Martinez. Dr. Martinez?
Thank you so much, Mark. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here with you all. I'm Cecilia Martinez, and I am the Senior Director for Environmental Justice at the Council for Environmental Quality. And let me just state that this is a historic moment, just as you mentioned, Mark. This is the first time ever in the history of the United States that environmental justice position is located within the executive offices of the President, and that there is a White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. It's, as you mentioned, the time is now to deal with both the racial and systemic biases that have been a fundamental part of our country. We all know the reports, as Representative and Chairman Grijalva mentioned, that basically, unless we deal with climate change in a way that affects disproportionately affected low-income and communities of color, we will continue to have these problems in our institutions and systems. And I think all our communities very fully well are aware of the problems that exist in their communities. The reports and the research simply give light to the experiences that they have had for many decades, if not hundreds of years. And so I'm truly honored to be part of the President's initiative to continue to try and address these incredibly difficult challenges, but ones that we have to deal with if we are going to live up to the ideals of democracy and justice that this country was founded upon. So thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's great to have you on the panel, Dr. Martinez. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I'd also like to welcome Heather Tanana. Heather?
Heather Tanana Yeneshe, Dene Nishle. I'm a citizen of the Navajo Nation and a research professor at the University of Utah's Law School, also associate faculty with Johns Hopkins Center for American Indian Health. And I'm just so happy to be here. As discussed before, the impacts of climate change, they're increasingly being felt by communities of colors. And so the discussion we're having now, and hopefully that you continue to have in the future, it's just more important than ever. So thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Professor Tanana. And finally, we have with us Angela Manso. Angela, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation from CHCI. And it's an honor to also be a sponsor of this environmental town hall at this year's leadership conference. As has been said, this is such an important and timely subject, environmental justice, of course. And it's not certainly an issue that is new to our organization, NRDC, but it's certainly one where we want to make sure that we are doing absolutely everything we can to support those frontline communities most impacted, disproportionately impacted by climate degradation and environmental degradation. We know that this is not a fight that we can do alone. We know that communities are doing so much work to bring attention to these issues. And I think the events of this past year have highlighted just how much more work we have to do and the urgency of it all. So I'm really excited that we're going to have this conversation today with this amazing panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. And I welcome all the panelists. I'm glad that we can be here virtually and hopefully next year in person to be able to have this conversation. And excited that the audience can hear from you all. Let's start with a level setting question. Dr. Martinez, I'm going to start with you. What does environmental justice mean to you? What are some of the main components in environmental justice? You're on mute, Dr. Martinez.
Apologies. Thank you for that question. I take the definition of environmental justice from the communities themselves and from the movement. And so, as we all know, the environmental justice movement defined environmental justice as having healthy, sustainable, and viable environments where we work, where we live, where we play, where we pray, and where we learn. Essentially, the planet. It's the earth and it's our built environment. And I think for too long, we have, in terms of the institutions and systems in this country, have siloed those different areas of a living reality, of a community in this country. And so one of the things that I think is critically important as we move forward is taking that very holistic and comprehensive definition of environmental justice. It means housing, it means green space, it means the schools, it means the community centers, it means the workers, it means the industry that is located next to your community or in your community. It means the highways and the way that transportation functions. All of those are part of environmental justice. And until we start looking at those sectors in an integrated and intersectional way, we will continue to miss the mark. And that's what to me is very exciting about the dialogue and the conversations that we are having today in this country, is that it is beginning to look at a holistic and integrative way in which we look both at our natural and our built environments in this country, and then the impacts that those have on the health and safety of our families.
Thank you. And I want to open this up to the other panelists if they care to speak about it.
Yeah, well, something I'll just add is, in order to move forward and ensure we are addressing the inequities that clearly exist, I think it's also an important component that we look to the past and that we have to acknowledge the federal policies, the structural racism that created the conditions, the lack of infrastructure. I mean, there's so many communities in the United States today, so many homes that do not have running water into their home. And that was a result of a lot of, really inaction and the federal government not fulfilling its responsibilities. This is particularly true with Indigenous people, with the treaty and trust responsibilities, but it applies to all Americans. We should not have any Americans here in the 21st century, when we're traveling to Mars and have all of these technological advancements, that they don't have the basic utilities that an average American takes for granted. So I'll just add that, Angela.
Yeah, and the follow-up question I have to you, Heather, is with these treaty and trust responsibilities to tribal communities that the federal government historically has failed to uphold, especially with respect to inequities around the lack of infrastructure, water, insecurity, food deserts, and many others. How are Indigenous communities responding, and what are some grassroots organizations doing to help fill in those gaps that the federal government is presenting?
Yeah, that's such a good question, because certainly I don't think we should let the federal government off the hook. They have a responsibility and a role to play, but at the same time, we can't wait years and years for them to step up and for Congress to appropriate the necessary funds to get infrastructure out into these communities. So by necessity, we've been seeing a lot of community grassroots efforts where organizations are filling that gap to deliver water to homes, to put solar panels on top of homes so that they're no longer in the dark. And at the same time, that has also built a lot of community resilience and community capacity. It's training individuals at a local level so that they can start filling the need. And really at its core, right, EJ movements that are motivated and fueled by the community, I think they're going to be the most successful, because it's that community that knows the needs. They know the issues they're facing. And if we can promote leaders from within, I think we'll just be much more successful to maintain into the future.
Thank you.
I would add to that,
Yeah.
Mark, sorry. Of course, adding myself to the comments that have been shared in terms of the definition of environmental justice, and what Dr. Tanana just mentioned, which is, these are solutions that are also, supporting solutions that are coming from the communities that are also affected. As much as we want to come in and try to solve a problem, that community itself will know what it is that it needs and how to get there. So those of us who do have the resources and the opportunity to support their capacity building, certainly should step into that role. So, and that's something that's really important to us. On tribal lands, I'm not an expert in my organization in terms of the work that we do there, but I do know and understand that there are, working in tandem with Indigenous leaders, making sure that they are building that resiliency, that they are building that capacity to be able to deal with the challenges that are presented, and of course supporting them in the way that they want to address whether or not the federal government is meeting its treaty obligations to that community.
Thank you, Angela. And it seems like, and I mentioned this with Congressman Barayan, that COVID-19 has really exposed the disparate issues that affect our communities, especially when it comes to clean air and air pollution, and the effects that it's had on mortality in our communities. How do you see these challenges when it comes to clean air, when it comes to clean water, especially on how they are affecting and impacting communities of color, Angela?
Sure. When as you were mentioning that question, the first thing I thought of was, what it exposed was the weakness of our social safety net, right? If we could even call it a net, given, so many ways in which people had need and could not be met. And that, of course, accelerated a conversation on that. And I think there was maybe a time when folks thought, well, it's going to move on of the agenda, all these other conversations we're going to have. I don't think so, and especially for climate. I think because people started to see, a lot of research was started to see the connection between that, the environment and the susceptibility of certain communities to contracting COVID and suffering its worst effects. I think what it did is really start people to think about the conditions in which low-income families, low-income communities, BIPOC communities are living and working, and how is it that, what is our obligation, what is our responsibility to ensure that when we're talking about these issues, we are really talking about it in a holistic way. We cannot address a housing issue if we're not also addressing, or excuse me, the reverse. We can't address environment if we're not addressing the housing issue. We're needing to look at the kind of air quality that exists in many of these communities. We're needing to think about, the quality of the water. When the at the height of, and I'm not saying that it's no longer a problem, but at the height of the evictions, and all the work that was going into that, people starting to think about, wait a minute, we're in the middle of a pandemic. How are we justifying putting people out in the street or putting them at greater risk, not being able to have access to clean water, not being able to have access to, to stay in place at the same time. So we really have to start thinking about these issues in a much more integrated fashion, as I think both of our panelists already have mentioned, and making sure that we, this is not the last pandemic, unfortunately. We may face some other events. We need to be thinking really smartly about what are we going to do the next time this happens. Make sure that we have the structures in place that work this time around, that work for people.
Professor Tanana, also, the hardest hit community from COVID was the Indigenous community. Did that expose the disparities in the health systems, in the environment in those communities as well?
Yeah, absolutely. There's research that has early research that's connected COVID incidence rates with the lack of plumbing, which just makes sense, right? Clean water is so essential to public health. And the food deserts that exist out in several tribal communities. Navajo Nation is the size of West Virginia, and there's estimated like 13 grocery stores. And so how can it's hard to go to the store and stock up on food and go back home. I know there's the toilet paper shortage across the nation that was multiplied or even worse out in Indian country. And again, what I want to emphasize is that those disparities that were highlighted, they're not new. They've been there for decades. And I guess if there's any silver lining out of this, it's that the pandemic brought national media attention to these issues. And it was coming at the same time as the Black Lives Matter movement. And so for me personally, I'm really optimistic and hopeful for the first time, because I saw people who were not from Indian country, who didn't have family that were Native, but they cared about the issue. They saw the stories online and they were donating and, going to the representative, why don't we have pipelines out there? Why, I can work from home here, they can't there. And so if there's any kind of hope out of this dire situation we're in, it was that I was just so amazed at how much people cared once they learned about it.
Yeah, it did. The exposure was huge. And unfortunately, it took something like this to be able to get that out. Dr. Martinez, we've been talking about disparities in our community, and they've existed and they still exist. They didn't just come out of nowhere. But what are some of the positive things that the Biden-Harris administration is doing to address some of these disparities that we're talking about? And what more needs to be done?
Right. So I think there's a number of things. First of all, we need to have government and people in government that look different and have different experiences. One of the things that I have seen in my short time, I started at the end of January, obviously, my first time as a government employee. And what I've seen is the entry and the hiring of very key people in the administration in very key positions at high level positions who have both the experience, the knowledge, and the passion and the commitment to address the inequities and the inequalities that have been part of this country's history. And that's across the agencies, whether it's at DOE or at DOL or at HHS. In all of the agencies, there are people that hired at very high levels of government that can help to bring about change, that can see the change and foster the change within their agencies. In addition, I don't want to dismiss the fact that there have been career staff in government, in the federal government, who have been working hard throughout the years, sometimes supported, sometimes not supported. And I think it is the opportunity now to also take advantage of the immense knowledge of those people who have both sacrificed in terms of maintaining and staying with it during the times of when there hasn't been support for this kind of action. But more importantly, and just as importantly, I think the kinds of initiatives that we're seeing, you mentioned the Health Equity Interagency Working Group, the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. The first time ever we have environmental justice community leaders that are providing advice to the White House and to the Council of Environmental Quality. We've established the Environmental Justice Interagency Council. Again, a council that is made up of at least the deputy secretary level of across the agencies to begin to develop climate and environmental justice strategies in a whole of government approach to environmental justice. We have the Justice 40 initiative, 40% of the investment benefits in these major buckets of investments like clean energy, clean transportation, affordable and sustainable housing, health, climate, pollution reduction. Those that 40% of the investment benefits goes to communities that have been marginalized and have been underserved and underinvested in. Now, I want to say that all of these are wonderful. They're also truly transformational. And when we talk about transformation, it means that we have to shift the processes and the systems that have been in place in order to achieve these goals. I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges that we have, is to continue to figure out where the barriers are, where the obstacles are within the federal government to continue our goal toward this 40% investment benefits. We're talking about billions of dollars. And these are billions of dollars, make no mistake, as my co-panelists have indicated, that have been part of a disinvestment strategy for so long. So making sure that 40% of these investment benefits go to communities that have been underinvested for decades and decades is a principle of equality and justice. And it is time that we start working towards this, because at the end of the day, it's an ethical and a moral question fundamentally as to who we are as a people, as a society, as a country, and our children will continue to bear the brunt of the mistakes that we make by continuing to perpetuate inequality.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Martinez, and thank you for taking the risk and joining the administration to be able to be that EJ voice in the room and really support those issues and initiate them that you're talking about. I'd love to turn to our NGO panelists to see what their critique is of this agenda and what more needs to be done.
Sure, Mark. I have to say that this is an incredible opportunity for the climate movement. Having an administration that is receptive to these ideas, understands the science, respects it, has put together an incredible team across multiple agencies, and has given them the directive. We will address this, and we will do this in the whole of government. That is unprecedented, and that is music to many ears. And we want nothing but success for this effort, right? We want to make sure that we are partners with this administration in moving this agenda forward. Certainly, we know that there will be challenges that come along the way. We don't, if anyone knows NRDC, we do not back away from challenges. But we will speak truth to power as well when we feel that the administration may not be going as far as it can go. This window is open now, and we must do everything that we can to get as many things done as possible. in speaking to the Justice 40 thing, that's a brilliant initiative, and we certainly are supporting it 100%. And it's important to get it passed. It's important to get these things done. But as Dr. Martinez said, is the infrastructure behind it, right? To make sure that it gets implemented and make sure that it can be sustained. The work doesn't stop once, it's signed into law, if you will. The work begins at that point. And so we want to make sure that we're working with partners on the ground that can make sure that they see this actually happening in their communities. It isn't just, these investments aren't just these pipes, it's investments in jobs, right? It's investments in the community to be able to tackle these challenges that they have been highlighting for us, that they have been fighting for years, if not decades. So we really are enthusiastic about this opportunity. As I said, there are some challenges ahead of us, but I think we can overcome those and really come out at the end of this with a package that is responsive to the community and gets us much, much closer than we are right now towards the goal of addressing climate change.
Thank you, Angela. I want to remind the audience to please submit your questions in the Q&A button or to use the hashtag CHCI. HHM21 to be able to also submit your thoughts, reactions, and comments. So this is a moment that we've really learned intersectionality. We've also learned that our communities need to come together to work, to fight together, to advocate together. Brown, Black, Indigenous, frontline, low-income communities of color. So my question is, how can communities of color band together to advocate successfully for better policies, programs, and initiatives to fight against climate change at this vital moment that we're facing right now?
I'd love to hear
I'll
what
start.
ideas, Angela has. I just want to say, it is so necessary that the communities do it. I think in the past, all of these really important issues of voting rights and other civil rights, all of the different groups, Latino, Black, Indigenous, were fighting for it, but a lot of times we were doing it separately. And what I've seen in my work, just with building, community infrastructure, when different agencies work together, you go so much further. So it is key, I think, that the groups work together. Angela, what ideas do you have?
Well, I think we should start from the premise that, a lot of them are working together, right? A lot of them are seeing the connection between their issues, inside the environment space and outside. Bridge building, of course, is going to be key to this. You don't want folks to feel that in advocating for one issue area, somehow taking attention or resources away from another. It's all interconnected. Folks are realizing this, and what is exciting for me is, in terms of helping to build this movement is, understanding sort of where folks are in their environmental justice journey and, their interest in learning more and wanting to connect more with groups that are leading in this space. So, they know who their partner, they know who their natural allies are, they know who their partners are. I think there's that whatever fear or hesitation existed at one period, I think a lot of that is going away because people are understanding that the strength is in the numbers. And the more that they can connect these issues, much as we've done in this conversation today, the stronger they are in their ability to actually affect change. So I'm enthusiastic. I'm actually really, I'm excited about what's to come because groups are talking to each other and they are working together.
Excellent. It is an exciting moment and someone that we need to take advantage of and work together on, especially when it comes to, we're seeing now young people and all the work that they're doing and their brave fight that they're taking on many issues that were considered sacrosanct that we couldn't touch before. And now they're taking on and really changing, making change at a pace that we haven't seen. Hopefully that will continue. One interest that has grown in the last decade is the career of environmental justice advocacy and environmentalism overall as a career. And so with a lot of young people, CHCI has a huge audience of young people that are very interested in hearing from you. How should Latinos who are considering careers in environmental justice advocacy do it? And, how do we help to create and support this pipeline that's necessary?
So I can start. First of all, maybe I'm probably the most senior person here, so I can claim a status of having been in this for quite a number of years. And let me just say that I think one of the most important things that our young people can bring forward is, first of all, to find the right educational program that will give you the kinds of curriculum and the kinds of ideas that will help you to understand the system, but also understand how to transform the system. There are many programs that can give you sort of how to understand the economics or how to understand urban planning or the knowledge of political systems. But what you also need is the tools that will help you understand how to change and challenge the systems that are in place. And I think also one of the most fundamental things that I've also carried with me, which I know is part of our communities and our communities' principles, is to always stay connected to communities, no matter where you are, no matter what position you undertake. I have been, I'm sorry, my White House operations alert has just popped up. I don't know what is happening, so I'm going to have to stop and see what is happening with this alert.
Let's transition. Angela?
Sure. To piggyback on Dr. Martinez's comments, certainly, you want young people to really look into the programs that give them the skill sets to make an impact in this space. It's also the learning opportunities, doing the real work, being in the organizations. At NRDC, we would love to have interns from CHCI, from other programs that are interested in environment and climate, environmental justice. We want to make sure that we are, part of the solution to the pipeline issue by giving them that real world experience and understanding how, organizations like ours operate in this space. We do a lot of different things. We have a large, litigation team, but we also have programs and communications teams. So there are all aspects, different elements of our work that we can utilize to help elevate many of these issues and move them forward. So that's a really incredible, important part. But also, at the end of the day, why do they want to be in this? Their passion. If this is what, makes you want to get up every morning and do, don't squash it, don't set it aside, go with it. There are, I think, many opportunities in organizations like mine and others that are similarly situated, where folks can gain that experience and put them on a path to be leaders in their communities.
Heather?
Yeah. Well, I think both Dr. Martinez and Angela really hit it on the nail. One, any work that you do, it's going to be more enjoyable if you enjoy it. And so I wouldn't want to encourage anyone to enter any field that they don't feel passionate about. But if you do care about these issues, you need to be involved. I think something I've learned from my career, I have been motivated by my family's experience that they went through seeing the inequities in Indian country. And I personally wanted to be a part of improving that. And you can't rely on anyone else to do things that you care about. You need to be a part of it. And that's really important when it's your own community, because people who have good intent, they may have good intentions, but they don't know what that experience was like. You really bring something unique and of immense value when you're fighting for your own cause. And again, it's relying on others that might not happen, or they may misportray or really not understand the issues at hand. So I just want to emphasize, like, help is needed in this area. It's a big growing area. And if you come from the community, you have very valuable expertise just to begin with.
Thank
That
you.
last point is very key.
Yeah. And Dr. Martinez had to exit to attend to White House business, and so won't be returning. So we do have a question from the audience from Amaris saying, how can advocates continue this momentum with future administrations, especially ones that may not be as committed to addressing environmental challenges?
Sure, I'll take that. I think one of the most important things that folks have to keep in mind, and this is born from my many years of experience in government affairs, is that Washington, D.C. isn't the only place where things happen. We may run into administrations that are not receptive to the message on climate change and may not be willing to take bold action. But cities and localities are doing incredible things at their level to ensure to put that community on the path towards a clean energy future. So, we don't have to look that far. I mean, California, of course, is always ahead of the curve doing a lot of things, but there are other smaller cities or large cities as well. You can think of Illinois and states as well, Chicago, New York, and other places where the local government, the mayors, the governors, state legislatures are taking these bold steps. So it isn't as though all of this shuts down until we get a president or a Congress that's receptive to these messages. It means that we shift our attention and put it towards those areas where we know we can also have an impact, perhaps a bit more immediate, and build on that momentum to generate change at the national level.
Yeah, I really like that focus on local efforts because, tribes as sovereign governments, they do pass their own tribal laws, and many tribes have implemented and adopted their own climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies. And in fact, other states are looking at those plans and learning from those plans and what they've done. And so, the local level government has a lot of influence and power to control their environment. And then the other thing I'll add is just, use your vote to support, engage in the process. You are voting in your representative. Contact them, tell them what issues you care about. There's real power in that process and in your vote.
Thank you. And a final audience question is, across the nation, states are creating policies, programs, and initiatives providing solutions in regard to climate change. Which states or localities or tribal are leading on EJ?
Yeah. I'm in Utah and we are not a leader, I'll say. But tribally, again, the impacts of drought, and a lot of the tribes on the coast are having to seriously consider what to do as their land base is being threatened. And so a lot of those tribes up along the coast are taking real initiative. There's a lot of news coverage about our California tribes, the Yurok and Kuruk, about implementing Indigenous knowledge and science into their climate change plans, like with wildfires. And so that's kind of brought a lot of attention about what we can do with respect to wildfires. So again, a lot to be learned. I don't know if Angela, you have more to add on the state side.
I'll go back to the example of Illinois. I believe it was just last week where Governor Pritzker signed, a measure putting the state on a carbon-free, energy path by 2045. This is the first Midwest state to do that. It's ambitious. There were lots of organizations that came together to make this happen. It was, a couple of years in the making, but they got it done. And so, they're going even further. And I think California is right now. So I think California is sort of seeing it as, hey, we don't want somebody else to go back and, more ambitious, goals for them, set more ambitious goals for themselves. So we're really excited about that and having the opportunity to play a part in that with so many organizations in the state of Illinois and in Chicago to make that a reality. But it took work, but it got done, and it's possible. It's very possible for other states, to see that and take some ideas and start building their own plans going forward. So we're excited.
I do also want to mention, not as a question, but just mention that the audience did also express their concerns for how we can prepare for mass human migration in response to the climate catastrophe. Something we all need to be very aware of that's happening already. As we see most recently on the Texas border and the horrendous images that we saw today. And so that's something we could talk for hours on this panel on many of the issues that came up. And I want to thank the audience for participating. Now I'd love to hear any final words that you can tell us that might inspire our viewers to learn more and do more and be more proactive on these issues.
Sure. I'll go first, and I'll say, for the folks who are watching this, thank you, first of all, for being here. Your presence means that you are interested, you want to learn more because you care. You're in a unique position where you can see the intersection of these issues with so many others that you care about that are affecting the Latino community. Be the bridge. I would say be that bridge. I think there are others who are looking for ways to get engaged in these issues and just haven't quite figured out what that is or how to do it. Be that bridge for them. That is an important role that you can play in educating community about the role that they get to play, make their voices heard and impact this issue because it is affecting them directly. In more ways than we could articulate here today. And get engaged. Look at organizations like mine, NRDC. Consider doing an internship or a fellowship with our organization. I think it would provide you with an incredible perspective to take back to the communities where you live, where you're from, and build a movement, if you will, to address climate change and address the environment. So I say, there's plenty of opportunity, certainly seize it, take advantage of it. And I hope to see you at some point when we're back in the office in the hallways of NRDC.
Yes, seize the moment. Thank you, Angela.
Sure.
Yeah, and just piggybacking off of that, again, I think we've all emphasized that now really is the time to be involved and to do something about the issues that you care about. And I want to emphasize that you don't need to do it alone and you shouldn't feel like you're alone. Again, we go further when we are working together. And if you're thinking about going to law school, reach out, email me. Angela can do the same, right? Finding mentors is critical. And in this day and age, there's email and LinkedIn. You shouldn't feel shy about reaching out to someone because I tell you, I am thrilled anytime someone emails me and says, hey, Professor Tanana, I'm thinking about going to law school. I care about environmental issues. And sometimes I might say, based on your goal, well, maybe you should consider this program, or other things. Just reach out, build your network, find a mentor to help you, and share your stories. I think, again, what the pandemic illuminated to me was that people care, and but they don't know about the histories. They don't know about the situations in our communities. And so we need to educate. Yes, I think it definitely is on the broader community to educate themselves, but it makes it personal if you're willing to share those stories. And I've made some real connections when I've shared my family stories. And so with that, recruit your allies, go and do good.
Well, excellent. Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Angela. And I want to also thank Dr. Martinez for being here. And we really do appreciate these words. Again, we'd love to be able to have a much longer conversation, and I'm sure we will in the future. But thank you for inspiring. Thank you for the work that you do, and let's keep fighting it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have heard from our leaders and our panelists that now is the moment for us to address the climate crisis. We are the first generation to experience the worst effects of the climate crisis and the last to be able to do anything to stop it. Scientists are reporting that we have already baked in 1.5 degrees of warming and can only hope to stem the worst effects of climate change on our children. We now have a little over 5 years to take the significant actions we need to prevent these worst effects. This is real, people. We are in a documentary moment that future generations will watch in their classrooms. Will they watch a story about the audacious generation that saved the future of humankind, or as the generation that failed them by not doing the hard work while they still had the chance? This is important. How are we going to be remembered? We need to come together in community, in love for each other, in love for humankind, to fight to prevent this from happening. I look to everyone on this call, on this video, on this panel, to everyone watching, to participate in your community. Like they said, it's not all federal. Get involved locally, get involved in your state, get involved in your community. But whatever you do, take this opportunity to be a star in this documentary so that your children and future generations will thank you. I want to thank our great panelists for this thoughtful discussion, and keep tweeting about the conference at hashtag CHCIHHM21. We have a full slate of sessions scheduled for today, including several more plenaries and panel discussions. I encourage you to attend sessions throughout the day. If you know of people who would be interested in the conference but haven't signed up yet, encourage them to register by visiting chci.org. Also, please join our virtual 44th annual awards gala celebration on Thursday evening, September 23rd, from 6:30 to 8 p.m. We have significant speakers that were just announced. Once you register for the conference, you will also be registered for the gala. Nothing more to do than log back in. So we will all see you there. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.